Toad for DB2 has a very powerful SQL editor feature within it for both DB2 ZOS and LUW. Now there are many ways to open up a SQL editor. You could go to the Tools menu and click on this editor, or you could actually click on this big large icon on the toolbar. And that will launch the SQL editor, an empty SQL editor, and you can begin entering your SQL statements. So for example, we have code completion on by default, so it's going to assist you in writing your SQL. So as I start typing, it's going to give me a list of tables that I could use in my select clause. So I'm going to select the players table and hit enter. And here you can see that it's populated the entire column selection from that table. And it's very easy to generate that SQL and run it. And if we start all over again, I'm going to try it again. Type in a select statement, and I'm going to select football players. And then from here, if I don't want to select all of the columns, which I did last time by default, I could select the columns that I wish to choose. So it brings up a list of columns for the table, and then I could hit enter, and it only inserts those columns that I've selected. And it's very easy to create a where clause as well. If I say where, Toad's going to give me a list of columns again. So I'll be able to say things like, I'll say position, I'll say equal. And what Toad will do is actually going to bring back by default the top 20 unique values. So I'll choose QB for quarterback. And here now I have a query. When I run it, it's going to bring back the top, my list of quarterbacks in my football players table. And you can continue to add things such as, if I wanted to add more, I could say, and boom, it gives me, perhaps only want those quarterbacks with a weight less than 200 pounds. Now, if I run this, it's going to bring back a little bit smaller subset list. So very easy to create large, complex SQL statements. We have many options within the SQL editor, including the ability to format. If you have real large, ugly statements, you could use this format button. It will format those to your liking. There are several canned formats that we could use. You could actually roll your own underneath options as well, but there are several different ways that Toad could be used to format SQL to make it more user-friendly and readable for you as well. One thing that we have a lot of places all over Toad is the ability to get more information for objects. So while I'm in the SQL editor, I could actually click on a table name and hit F4, and you'll notice that the object details panel gets displayed with the additional information about that table. So you can see the columns, you can see the dependencies, you can see a script. So all this information is available just by hitting F4 while you're when your cursor's on an object. There are many additional options. You could send this to an automation script. You could send the SQL to our multi-query database query facility. A lot of other different things you could do inside the editor. I'm going to close down the object details. Another thing to know within the editor is we've got a concept called SQL recall. And what Toad does as you execute statements within the SQL editor, it actually keeps track of those. So like the last 100 by default, it will keep track of. So if you wanted to bring back and execute a statement that was previously executed, all you need to do is bring up the SQL recall window, double click on the SQL, and that SQL will show up for you. So it's a very handy feature for using with Toad for DB2. If you wanted to keep the SQL around, we have a concept called name SQL. So you could actually keep SQL around forever so it doesn't scroll off the top 100 or the last 100 list by just moving it over to the named SQL. Another thing that we have is we got the ability to use snippets. Or I'm going to get rid of the SQL recall control, and I'm going to bring up the snippets control. So you view code snippets. And what code snippets are they are shortcuts or quick and easy way for you to lay the correct syntax for things like functions, scalar functions, aggregate functions, cursor statements, miscellaneous scalar functions. So for example, if you knew that you wanted to include an average statement in your SQL, you could just double click, and the syntax for including the aggregate function average will appear in your SQL script. Um, there are other things such as casting. If for example, if you wanted to cast something to a decimal, you could just double click on that and it will give you the correct syntax. Along with generating the correct syntax inside your script, we also have links to the IBM documentation for specific help on that function that you choose. So I clicked on this link right here and it brought up the IBM documentation about that specific scalar function. So a lot of details there can be just easily gotten and obtained just by a real click of the mouse. And these snippets can be customized. You could create your own. Each one has a shortcut. So for example, instead of bringing up snippets and having to double click or select these things, you could just type in the shortcut. So the shortcut here is AVG. So if I just type in AVG, AVG, control spacebar, it's actually going to insert the snippet for me directly without having to move my cursor over here. So a lot of easy ways to identify and create the correct syntax for your SQL. And I just want to mention that there are a lot of different options involving the editor. If you bring up tools options, you could see that there are things that talk about general options, talk about code completion, talk about highlighting, the formatter, as I mentioned, there's many different ways to format. You could add your own types of formats. So a lot of different things and powerful tools inside the Toad editor as well. One thing I want to talk about here is the concept of auto aliasing. And an alias is basically a word that follows your table that allows you to reference columns in SQL without needing to type the entire table name in. So we've got this automatic aliasing option. I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to start a select statement again. So I'm going to select my football players table and select some columns. And as you can see, Toad automatically generated an alias of FP. It uses the first byte from the first part of the word and then the first byte after the underscore to get that. And then I'm going to just type in another select statement. I'm going to go from the teams. So from the teams, I'm going to bring in a couple different columns from the teams and select enter. And so now I've got a couple different SQL statements here. As I run SQL, you'll notice that the result sets get displayed at the bottom. And by default, Total will use up to 5 individual tabs and start reusing those. And it's customizable. So you'll see since I have 2 select statements here, well, I actually have my option set to display all the results in one tab. So since I ran this script, and it had 2 select statements, there's like a mini selection inside of each script. And that's customizable. You could actually display each result set on an individual tab if you so wished. And the result sets, that there are grids again, and the grids are very powerful, so you could do many things. You could, use your group by just dragging a column up to the group by display. You could drag that back. You could reorder columns. You could sort by clicking on that. So the grid display, very powerful. You could do things like, easily export this data to a file that is any of your results sets. You could export to a file or bring up our export wizard, which will allow you to save it in various different formats. So a very powerful feature there. If you wanted to see the SQL that was related to it, a given statement, you could actually use this control here to expand the SQL so you could see exactly what SQL was used to drive this result statement. Very handy there. I'm going to close down this editor for now, not save anything, and just show you how easy it is for Toad to, generate SQL. So I use this, quite often. I'll just generate SQL to a SQL editor, and it's going to bring up a SQL editor and allows me to quickly and easily generate a SQL statement in the editor. And again, I can modify that statement and add my own where clause, for example, where position equals, this time I'm just going to say linebackers, hit enter. So now I've eliminated everybody but linebackers in my football table. So very easy and quickly to do that. And the editor comes into play in more and more places in Toad for DB2. Like for example, if you're going to alter any type of object, and it includes syntax that would be an extended alter where you'd have to drop and recreate the object. So for example, maybe you have a new column and you want that new column to be the first column of your table. Well, in order to do that, you're going to have to drop and recreate the table. And you could send that script to a SQL editor. And once you're within the SQL editor, you can see that SQL editors support all types of statements, not only queries, but drop, create, modify, grant statements, everything. We have a little feature inside the SQL editor that's called the script map. It's like an active table of contents. So if you double click on these statements here, it will actually jump you to those statements. So it's a pretty slick and cool little feature. It's customizable color-wise, what statements you actually want to highlight within that. So that is the script map feature in the SQL editor. And when you actually run your results, you'll see the results on the bottom. You could actually open up existing query files, and that will actually open up a brand new SQL editor. And you can see here in this existing query file, I've got a couple of SQL statements here inside this file. If you run it, it's going to run and it's going to produce all the output. If there were any error messages, those would display on your messages panel here. What you could also, I'm going to close some of these down again. You could also close the rest of these. Again, start with an existing table, send it to generate SQL to a SQL editor, and just going to add a where clause, where years pro is greater than 10. Let's see if there's any. Yes, so these are bringing back all my players that have been in the league more than 10 years. There, you'll notice that there's an explain tab on the bottom part of the results grid, and this is going to give you the access plan for the current SQL statement that you've run. And it can be formatted in various different ways. You could format it as a tree plan. You could format it as a data table plan. So many different ways you could use the explain output to give you a basic access path information for the SQL statement. That is a high level training of the SQL editor.